U will be very similar to writing I, and will feel as if you're writing two I's really close in succession. To start, begin with the lead into the letter. Start at the bottom guideline between the two slants, and with light pressure bring the brush tip up towards the right slant. Lift your brush off the paper and place your brush on the middle guideline along the slant. Drag the brush down until you hit the bottom guideline. Bring the brush back up with light pressure towards the next slant and repeat the second stroke again. This time, when you lift your brush up from the bottom guideline, it will make the tail of the U. The lead into the U is similar to other letters such as I and J, to name a few. To start, I place my brush between the two slants, which is an appropriate distance the U should have from a preceding letter. Remember, when you are dragging the brush down from the middle guideline to use heavy pressure, but once you hit the bottom guideline, bring the brush tip back up to use light pressure, including when you make that tail. If you feel comfortable, try combining U with other letters. There's nothing that you're going to need to change about the way that you've been practicing the U, other than just making sure you're connecting the U's with other letters coming before or after it. And make sure that the tail is high enough to touch the next letter. These are quite different from any other letter that we've written. Start with your brush tip next to the slant under the middle guideline. Bring the brush tip up and drag down along the next slant. When you get to the bottom guideline, bring the brush tip back up. That first stroke of your V should look like a backwards S. Make a small tail by painting a line off of that first stroke with light pressure. Using the slants are important for this letter, and it's good to remember to stay within the middle and bottom guidelines. This will give you an idea of how to make the proportions of the V, because it'll feel a little weird trying this on your own at first. The middle slant should be right in the center of your V, and that would be a good guide as to how to slant the letter. It's a good idea to practice going into your V's, because when you connect another letter with V, it should flow all together in one stroke. There isn't really a place where you can lift the brush off of the paper until you've made that big stroke in the beginning. Once you've completed the first stroke, the tail will continue on to the next letter, so it doesn't just end up looking like a nub at the end of the stroke like it does when you write the letter by itself. Let's move on to W. The first stroke is a lead into the letter. Then from the middle guideline, drag the brush down along the slant and bring it back up, similar to the way that you would make a tail for letters that we've practiced in the past, like A, D, or L. Halfway between the middle and bottom guidelines, stop and bring the brush tip back down to the bottom guideline with heavier pressure and bring the brush back up to the middle guideline to finish that W. The middle peak and the last stroke never reaches the middle guideline, and that's just because I don't love the way that it looks when I write it that way, but that's just my preference. I start with the lead-in very close to the preceding slant. When I drag my brush down, I make sure that it's connected to the beginning stroke. A good way to make sure that it appears connected is to make sure that your brush gets closer to the slant. A good thing to remember is to use that slant when making your first descending stroke. When you connect W's with other letters, and the W comes first, make sure to add a little connecting stroke like you did with the letter V in order to connect it with the next letter. When writing W's after letters, the tail of the preceding letter acts as a lead into the stroke, so it doesn't need to be repeated. The X should feel familiar if you've been following along in this video, because the first stroke is very similar to the V, and it should look like a backwards S that is drawn along the slant. The only difference is that instead of making a little stroke off of the tail, I drag the brush across the first stroke. Although you are dragging the brush downward, you don't want to use heavy pressure on the brush because it would make the X look really uneven. Instead, use light pressure on the brush when you cross that X, which is one of the rare times that you're going to use light pressure even though you're bringing the brush down. X is a letter that I do not write or practice enough. It feels a bit strange when writing it out of context of a word. But if you follow the rules you followed for the letter V, using that slant to guide your stroke, it should become easier to write. Connecting X's with other letters can be simple when the X comes before letters, but it can be challenging when it comes between letters. The reason why is because you'd have to write the stem of your previous letter and go right into the X without lifting your brush off the paper. Getting comfortable with writing X right after another letter will help you feel more comfortable about this transition between letters later on. Y is a combination of letters that we've practiced before. You can think of it as a U with a stem of a J, or you can think of it as an I and J stuck really close together. Start with your brush tip at the middle guideline along the slant and drag the brush tip down. When you hit the bottom guideline, bring the brush tip back up with light pressure and bring it back down on the next slant. This time, extend it past the bottom guideline and loop it back up and around. When trying these without the trace letters, make sure that you use your slants as a guide to where to put your two downstrokes. The first one should be on one slant and go to the bottom guideline. The second one should be on the next slant and should extend past the bottom guideline. When you connect them to other letters, you shouldn't have to change anything about the way that you write them. Just make sure that they're touching the tails and the lead-ins of the letters that come before or after it. Now we've come to our last letter. We're going to start with the dip that we talked about when writing our H and K's, but it's going to be small and it should lead the brush up to the point where the slant meets the middle guideline. Bring the brush tip down along the slant. Bring it up slightly and make a loop like you would the tail of a G, J, or Y. I start with my first stroke, which includes the dip and ascent to the middle line, and I typically lift my brush off the paper before dragging my brush down along the slant. And then I also lift my brush off the paper before making my tail. It just makes it easier for planning where my next stroke should go. To connect Z's with other letters, only make the dip when there are no other letters preceding it. Otherwise, make that first stroke a smooth continuation of the previous letter. Notice how my first and second Z look different. This concludes the Inkarella lowercase brush calligraphy series. You can find all products that I use listed in the video description below. You can also find all the brush lettering guides that I use for free on my website at www.inkarella.com/learn. Thanks so much for your support. I'm hoping to come out with a better and more comprehensive version of these brush lettering guides in the future, but I will need your help in doing so. If you have any useful feedback for me about the brush guides or videos, please feel free to email me, jessie@inkarella.com, or simply comment on this video. To support me, you can visit my Patreon page. This helps me going since filming and editing videos are a lot of work, especially when I'm sick, like now. It'll give me the means to work on these lettering videos and the possibility to produce more than just a few guide sheets. You can support me by visiting www.patreon.com/Inkarella. Thanks for watching!